An interview with Rita Campbell, tape 2.
So let's start with your full name.
Just Rita.
Rita, and what was your maiden name?
Eshelby.
And where and when were you born?
I was born at 30 Millman Road, Kensal Rise, northwest London. And when I was born, some aunts on my father's side and some on my mother's side, his sisters and things, call her this and call her that, Emily, and you know. And he said, I'm not calling her anything, I'm just calling her Rita. So my mother always used to say, I think he must have had a girlfriend before he made me call Rita. And he wouldn't, no other name at all, no.
What did she think of the name Rita?
Oh, I just think I think after she got over having me, I was a breech birth and great difficulty to the poor woman. She wouldn't get less, I don't think, no.
Were you born in hospital?
No, I was born at 30 Millman Road. Yes, and had Dr. Clark and a midwife. I remember Dr. Clark because he was always my childhood doctor. My mother doted on him because, of course, he was up all night. I mean, it must have been a very trying time for him. I mean, a breech birth at home wouldn't have been funny, would it? No.
So what do you remember of him?
Very lovely man, elderly, with glasses, you know, a bit sort of these, pince nez, you know, and, yes, if I had a finger ache, I had to go and see Dr. Clark, because I was absolutely coddled up, you know, and spoilt to death, really. Yes, don't really think either of my parents knew how to handle baby very well.
What was your mother's full name?
My mother's full name was Ada Emily Breton. And my father's full name was Horace Hubert G. Eshelby. G, I think, was the family name.
And what was your mother's date of birth?
They were both born on the 13th of October. Now, the year escapes me. I'd have to look it up, Heather.
Were they the same age exactly?
They were the same age, and when they met one another, started going out, obviously, when you're one would neither believe the other. Oh, you know, you're having me on, see? And they had to both produce their birth certificates before they would, amazing, really. Both the same age, you see, too.
How did they meet?
Well, in those days there were a lot of musical evenings, and I think my mother was very musical. She was a very good pianist. My father could sing, he had quite a good voice. And I think they met at a mutual friend's house. My mother was playing the piano and he was probably singing and that's how they met. And then the tale goes that for some reason, after they'd been going together for a while, I've forgotten what the quarrel was about, but they had a quarrel. And they never saw one another for about a year or so. Neither would give in, and they never saw. Yeah. And then they met again at a mutual social sort of gathering. And,
What was the date of their marriage?
I think it was the 21st of June. In June.
Any idea what year?
No, I'd have to look it up, love. I was born in 1913, and they were married 3 years before I was born. So you see,
1910.
About then, or 1909, something. Yeah.
Give me a word picture of your mother. Not just her physical description, but the description of her character also.
Oh, my mother was a lovely person. Everybody loved my mother. She listened to everybody's troubles. She worked in the post office, and I think she knew everybody's troubles for miles around. She was a very outgoing person. clever in playing the piano, and very social lady, loved company. Yeah, very kind person. I can't ever remember being nasty or anything about anybody. No, no. She loved to. I can remember going home with her some nights from the post office when I was quite small, and I wanted to get home, you know. And she'd meet these various people walking home, and they'd stand there, and I used to pull her skirt, come on, Mum, come on, Mum. And, oh yes, she'd be, you know, deep conversation with this other female. And I remember getting, what do you want to, you know, I want my supper or something. No, she was a lovely lady, yeah. Yeah, never saw any bad in anybody, not really. No.
And what was she like physically?
Well, she's bigger than I am. Bigger boned, I think, and bigger
Taller?
than I am. Yes, taller. Mm.
So you're about 5'2"?
Yes, she'd be about 5'5", probably, love. Yeah. Well, I don't know I can't remember so much when she was younger, but when I remember she was fairly stout, and her sister, yeah. But they didn't worry about weight in those days, you see. They just sort of, you know, ate thin, didn't worry, and just went along with it. Mm.
So what colour hair?
Oh, she had dark hair, brown eyes, and it never turned quite grey, just pepper and salt. Curly hair, fairly curly hair, and my father had very curly hair, beautiful wavy hair, my father, in his wedding photo. But see, mine, I didn't inherit that, unfortunately. If I'd had a brother, I bet he would have had beautiful curls. Mm.
How did she wear her hair?
Well, she wore it long and just sort of piled up in a bun when I was very, very small. I don't remember that. But I do remember when she had it bobbed. My father was pretty furious. And for some reason I can remember that. It was just during or after the First World War, must have been. I must have been about 5 or something, 4 or 5. And she went and had her hair cut off in a bob, which all the women were doing in those days, you see. And he wasn't very pleased, but still she never grew it again after that. And it looked quite nice because it was fairly curly. She always wore glasses. She'd worn glasses since a child. And she'd also had her ears pierced, because in those days they thought that having your ears pierced helped your eyesight, but it didn't do anything. She was always very short-sighted, and she wore these pince-nez, you know, and she always wore earrings, and I can see her now in front of her dressing table. She'd get an earring and she'd lick the end, you know, she'd go
Stick it in her ear.
stick it in her ear. I would have to lick it, you know. I can see her doing that now, yeah. Yeah.
And what about your father? Give me a description of him.
Oh, yeah, he was a different type. He wasn't a bit like my mother. No, he was very different. Although he went along with her, but he wasn't as sociable as my mother. No, I don't know what he would have been like, you see, without my mother. You know, she, at musical evenings and all that sort of thing, she used to get him up and made him sing, and he had a very nice voice, and he quite enjoyed gatherings, and yes, but he wasn't nearly so outgoing as my mother, not nearly. He was a dry old stick, really. Yeah.
Sense of humour?
Not a great deal. No, not an awful lot. No.
What about your mother's sense of humour?
Oh yes, she had a great sense of humour. Oh, yes, she had a great sense of humour. We used to sit on the buses because when they had half day in the post office, she used to take me to Selfridges as a treat on the roof garden, on the bus. We used to go and sit next to one another, and she'd, all of a sudden you'd feel her going, pressing her arm against your side. You'd say, "Look at that frightful hat on that woman. Did you ever see anything like it? Isn't it dreadful?" She'd sort of mutter. And of course, I being a kid, I used to look and get the terrible giggles. She was awful like that. Yeah, if you could call that a sense of humour. She was, yeah.
Was your father a kindly man?
Oh, very kind. Oh, very kind. Very conscientious. Too conscientious. Too conscientious for his own good, really, because he was too thorough. If he did a job, he did it to his, really put his, yes. I think that's why he never really got on a lot in the world, because he was too conscientious, really. He wasn't anything. He was only a clerk with the McFisheries when I was born, before the war, First World War. He used to go to the fish market to collect the money for the fish and and keep the accounts and all that sort of thing. That was his work, and I think they got reasonably, During the war, he went on munitions to Nottingham, and he got TNT poisoning and nearly passed out. And after the war, he never got his job back. They told them all, "Oh, you'll get your job back after the war," but they didn't. They put women in, and he never got his job back, which was, pretty awful, really. It happened to a lot of them. Yeah.
And what was he like to look at physically?
Oh, quite a handsome man, my father, yes. In his younger days, he was quite a stocky man, quite stocky, not terribly tall, about as tall as my mother, perhaps a little bit taller, and stockily built. Yeah. Nice hair, clean, never grew a beard or moustache, and always clean shaven. Yes, when he was dressed and clean, he was quite a good-looking man. Yeah.
What colour was his hair?
Browny colour, and he had sort of bluey eyes.
And can you remember anything of your grandparents?
I can only remember my grandmother, my mother's mother, and I can remember her very well because I almost grew up with her. She lived to 93, and dear, oh dear. I don't know how many she'd had. I must have had about 9 or 10 children. And her husband, my grandfather, was a baker. And they had 2 or 3 baker shops in London in his heyday. But he passed away by the time I was born. But they kept the baker's shop on. And my mother had an unmarried sister, my Aunt Louise, who always lived with the mother. And they managed to keep the baker's shop on with a baker to do that sort of. They lived above the shop. And huge room above the shop, great big room. And in the room they had 2, in the middle, one big round table. You know how they used to have these round tables with an aspidestra in the middle? And by the window another round table, smaller one, with another aspidestra. Great big sideboard, with vegetable whatsits on it, and plates and one thing and another, and a fireplace and easy chairs. And then they had a thing, I don't know whether it was seashells or something under a glass dome. Do you remember they used to have these, a bird, or a stuffed bird, it might have been a stuffed bird or something, under this glass dome, on another table, I remember. And then behind that there was the kitchen, and That had just a kitchen table and a thing you could, stove you cooked with if you wanted, but they had a gas stove as well, and a built-in sink. The sink was in a cupboard. A lot of London old homes had that. You wouldn't know the sink, you wouldn't know it was there if the cupboard door was shut, you see. But it wasn't, it was smelly, it wasn't very nice because there was no ventilation into it really. But you've got your sink when you open the cupboard, just enough to walk in, and a draining board. And then you could put yeah.
What was she like? What was her personality like?
My grandma, she's a lovely old soul. See, I only know her as she related to me, but I don't know what she was like bringing up her family or anything like that. But yeah, she used to sort of, yes, talk to me and things, and she was always very good to me. She used to make a pot of tea, and that went on all day. And they lived very frugally. And I've got an idea, and I'm pretty sure it's true, that the sister, my Aunt Louise, that stayed at home, I think she imbibed somewhat. Because I vaguely remember her very flushed of face sometimes. She never married, you see. She was a big, stout lady. That whether she ran my grandma or my grandma ran her, I don't really know, not really. I should think my grandma was the boss, really. Yeah, she was a little old lady, and she pulled her hair back with a bun at the back. She had lovely brown eyes, and I think she'd been quite a good-looking lady. And she had about 6 children, I think there were. My Uncle Jack died, I remember. I don't remember him, though. And I know in their heyday, my grandfather was taking her to Epsom in the pony and trap, because they lived that side of London. And she said to him, "Oh, I don't think we'll get to the races today, do you? Better turn back." So he had to turn back, whereas she got back in time to give birth to one, I don't know who it was.
So who was the oldest child of hers?
It was either Aunt Louise or my Uncle Walter. He was the eldest son and she was the eldest daughter. Which was the elder, I can't remember. There wouldn't have been much difference in it.
And who came next?
Probably my mother, and then Uncle Jack, and then Uncle Elfie. Oh, and then there was another sister, Auntie Dot. She died, I think. She was a good pianist too. But she lost some of her children. She didn't rear them all, That's all I can remember. Elfie and Walter and Louise and Dot and my mother, that's 5. And Jack that died, that's 6. So she reared 6 and lost probably a couple.
And do you have any memories of those aunts and uncles?
Oh, yes. I got that memory of my Aunt Louise. She, as I say, we used to think she, I don't blame her really. And yeah, my Uncle Walter, he was a harness and saddle maker, and he had a shop at Catford in London, and he married my Aunt Emma, and they had 2 girls and a boy. But in the Second World War, my Auntie Emma came up and stayed with us in Malden. You wouldn't remember. Well, you should. Of course she was quite an elderly lady then. And my Uncle Walter was still alive then. And he was working near the docks. And they were terribly badly bombed, and she used to worry about him. But he used to come to Malden about every weekend, But he got through all right. And she stayed with us for quite a while because the bombs got very bad. I don't know. I never kept. I know where one of her daughters died, her eldest daughter, and her youngest daughter Madge. She was left a widow very early in life, and I think I've still got her address, but I don't correspond with any of them, not now. It's too big a family, all scattered around. But I knew them well when I was a child because we used to go there for days. Just a bus ride from, we used to go there for days.
So did the family get together much?
No, not really as a family. We used to go there. That was my mother's eldest brother. We used to go to Croydon, where my mother's youngest brother had a shop, harness and saddle making, both harness and saddle making. And I think because we only had one child, that my parents only had one child, it was easier for us to go. They each had 3 children, and it was a harder job for them to, but occasionally they used to come, but I think that was, yes. My grandma used to go and spend, before she got too old, she used to spend summer, a week or 2 with both sons. They used to come and fetch her. And she'd always have to have her bonnet. She always wore a bonnet tied under the chin with velvet ribbon. And every year this bonnet went into the draper's next door. And one year she'd have violets on it, and the next year she'd have something else. It always had to be refurbished every year for this few weeks holiday that she had, yeah. She never wore a hat. She looked lovely though. Yeah, really sweet.
What else did she wear?
Oh, very old-fashioned long skirts and, sort of black clothes, nondescript really. You wouldn't, sort of nondescript thing. And she'd always, they didn't have a lot of money. And this vast sitting room they had, it would take them a minute to warm it. They used to have a small fire in the grate, and she'd sit in her armchair and a warm shawl round her, the legs. Yes, and one round her legs, because you couldn't really warm, not really to be comfortable,
What was her Christian name?
Oh, my grandmother's Christian name, whatever was it? Ola Renshaw was her maiden name. Ola Renshaw came from, I think, York, Cornwall or something. I can't for the life of me. No.
Getting back to your parents, I should have asked you, did you feel it was a happy marriage?
Yes. Yeah, I think so, because in fact, I think it was because my father was the type of man that I think my mother had to not court him, but she had to set her hat at him, and let it be known that I don't think he would have courted, unless he was quite sure of any woman. I can't imagine him going after. No, I think that she sort of thought, really. And I don't think he would ever. He wasn't that type at all that would ever look at another woman, I'm sure, with any. No. So yes, I think it was. Yeah, they had a lot of hardships, and I think it was wonderful. The terrible hardships they had.
In what way?
Financial, mostly. You see, my father never got his job back. My mother went back into the post office in the First World War because they asked her to, and I was only 1. And I had an Auntie Kate. She wasn't my real auntie, but she was a marvellous lady. She came every day and looked after me until I started school at 5. And my mother worked in the post office. My father was on munitions. That was the war. After the war, he never got his job back, you see. And she kept on at the post office because to earn money. And then, in the end, she took him into the post office and taught him the post office. It was in this baker's shop, which my grandmother had, you see, the post office. And he helped a bit with the baker's shop. And then, when I was, I don't know, about... then I started school. I think it was Buller Road School. I can't remember my first school, really, only very, very vaguely. I used to go with some older girl. I was about 4 or 5, I suppose.
We'll get on to your schooling later.
And then after... Then I don't know how, I must have been about 7. They got the chance of, they knew some people at Seaford in Sussex. And I think her name was Mrs. Cunningham. She wanted my mother to go into partnership with a boarding house, because it was seaside Sussex. And I think, thinking that my mother would be a big asset, which obviously was, because she could play for the guests, and she was very outgoing and things like that. So I think they thought that might be a good idea. So my mother and I went down there. My father stayed on in London. Luckily he did, at the post office. And he used to come down weekends and things like that, but I don't remember the exact... And I went to school there. I went to a convent there for a while. But I don't know the rights of it, but it didn't plan. It wasn't a success. I think this woman... My mother was a very... She wouldn't stick up for herself a lot, my mother. She wasn't one to... She was too kind-hearted, really. I think this woman bullied her, but, yeah.
Right, you were saying about your mother going down to help out the...
Yes, for some reason. I think we must have been there for about a year. I can't really remember, but it didn't work out for them for some reason. I don't think my mother was very happy. She was never very happy away from London. She was a real Londoner, my mother. So back again to London. And she went back again into the post office, and my father was still there. Then my grandma sold the bakery business, but she still continued to live up top, but she sold the business. But my mother and father ran the post office. And we had a flat not far, just up the road. All lived in flats in those days, couldn't afford houses or anything like that. And then it's terrible, isn't it? Your brain goes.
Never mind.
We for some reason we went. My father got offered a job at Hull, in Yorkshire. But then that wasn't until I was about 12 or 13. So we kept on with and I went to school, and they ran the post office, and we lived in the flat. And then I don't know whether the post office was closing up or what, but he got offered this job at Hull, and we went up to Hull, and we were in Hull for about 3 years. But my mother was never happy there. She suffered terribly with